guys, it's Kendra from Crafty Kendra. Today I'm going to show you how to make this card, so let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to do is bring in a piece of Very Vanilla. It measures 3 3/4 inches by 2.5 inches. And the double Mitten stamp from the Make a Mitten stamp set. We're just going to stamp that centered on this piece using Real Red. Okay, there we go. Now we're going to set that piece aside to dry and close up our ink pad. Before you do though, go ahead and stamp another mitten on scrap Very Vanilla and cut it out using your mitten punch. Let's set that aside. I'm going to bring in another piece of Very Vanilla. This piece measures 2 inches by 1 3/4 inch. And what I did is use my wood grain background stamp. And I stamped the wood grain in early espresso. And whenever I did this, I used a much larger sheet so that I can get a whole bunch of these at once. I'm going to bring in the crumb cake ink pad and our sponge dauber. And starting off the paper, we're going to go in circles and come on to this piece. Okay, and then we're just going to slowly work our way in. You could do it on a piece of crumb cake, but I like the variety that happens whenever I sponge it. Alright, now that we've sponged it, we're going to stamp the Noel greeting from the Greetings of the Season stamp set. Okay, we're just going to put a little bit of snail on the back of this to make sure it doesn't move. Going to center our greeting. Now we're going to stamp Noel and early espresso. And I'm going to do it a couple times because I want it to be really, really nice and dark. Just like that. Now we're going to close up our ink pad and set our stamps aside. Here I have a piece of Designer Series paper from the Candlelight Christmas Designer Series paperback, and it's actually a leftover piece from some previous cards, and it measures 1.5 inches by 4 1/4, and we will be cutting it down to be 3 3/4. But before we do that, we're going to bring in a piece of a piece of Whisper White, and this Whisper White piece measures 3 3/4 by 5 inches. We're just going to turn over this because we want the striped side to show, and attach some snail. And we're just going to line it up towards the bottom. And it's okay if you have some of your designer series paper hang over on one side. That's going to happen. And then you're just going to use your scissors and trim that off. Just like that. Okay. And we're going to set that aside. I'm going to bring in 3 pieces of cardstock. These all measure the same. They are all 1.5 inches by 3 3/4 inch. We're going to bring in our scallop border punch, and we're going to punch one side and then punch the other. Now that I've put them all through the scallop border punch, I'm going to bring in my tabletop cutter. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut them in half. Alright, and now that I've done that, what I'm going to do is just bring back in this Whisper White piece, and I'm just going to lay down a couple rows of snail. And then I'm going to start with the primrose petals. Just going to overlap my border a little bit. And I'm going to bring in my other primrose petals piece and add some adhesive to it and have it overlap. Next is Real Red. Other piece of Real Red. Just gonna see how we're doing here. Okay, actually gonna move this one row of Real Red down just a little bit. Okay. And after I have all those down, I'm going to bring back in my piece that I stamped the 2 mittens on, along with my sponge stopper and my crumb cake ink. And I'm going to sponge the edges, but when I sponge the edges, I'm going to bring in the sponging quite a bit. Alright, I'm just going to flip this piece over and add snail to the back of it. I'm going to line it up along the top edge. press it down. And then I'm just going to bring in my trimmer because I know what it's supposed to measure, and I'm just going to cut off whatever little bits that are hanging off all at once. Alright, now I've gotten all these little bits trimmed away. Just going to bring back in crumb cake, sponge dauber, and sponge the edge of the bottom. And I'm not making it as deep, I just want to sponge it a little. If you're afraid your white piece is going to show, you can just daub along the edges. And I'm just daubing it straight, I'm not actually using it like a sponge technique. I'm just kind of pushing it up against so that the edge will soak it up and it gets really dark. Okay. Done with our sponge dauber for now. Now what we're going to do is we're going to bring back in our Noel sign and our little mitten and some Lucky Limeade baker's twine, and we're just going to kind of measure where we want our strings to go. Okay, and then we're just going to cut the length. I'm going to put a little bit of snail on the two top corners of our sign to hold the baker's twine in place. Bringing in the mitten, I'm going to put a little daub behind it. Bring in the sign, make sure that it's going to fit. Flip it back over and we're going to add dimensionals. I'm going to add 2 to my mitten, 1 over the baker's twine and 1 more towards the top. I'm going to put 3 on my sign. Before I take off the backers, I'm going to go ahead and put holes into my sign's corners and then put some mini brads through. All right, just like that. Now we're just going to take off the backers. Okay, first lining up the mitten with the mitten that's already stamped. Just like that. Then setting our sign where we want it. Now what we're going to do is set that aside and bring in our card base. Our card base is an 8.5 by 5.5 inch piece of real red cardstock scored at 4 1/4 to make a standard size card. Our first layer is going to be a layer of primrose petals, and it measures 4 inches by 5 1/4. Just going to add some snail to it. Okay. Then I'm going to add snail to this piece, not getting close to the edges, so that I can layer my other one on top. The reason I'm doing it that way is since I already have so many layers on this piece. We're just going to center it onto the primrose petals. Here we go. For the inside of the card, I have another piece of Very Vanilla, and it measures 4 inches by 5 1/4. And without re-inking, I'm just gonna go through. Okay, flipping it over, I'm just gonna add some more snail. And it goes on the inside of the card. Just like that. And that finishes off the card today. I hope that you enjoyed it, and please stay tuned for more Christmas tutorials coming. That's all I have for you. Thanks for watching.